over there talking to people way over there about these schools and
Real quick before I get started, there are two restrooms right out the door. If you go through the where the fireplace is and to your left, there's a men's and women's room, and then also down the steps around the floor there's restrooms, and then also there's a parking lot down in the parking lot, so if it belongs to anybody, come see me. Okay, so I'm so glad they were all here. My name is Michelle Martino, and I'm part of a growing number of parents and teachers in Northeast Ohio who are concerned about the Common Core. Thank you for coming here tonight to learn more about the Common Core standards. I also want to take this time to thank my husband Paul and my daughters Angela and Nicole. Thank you for all your support. I love you. We would like you to leave here today with a better understanding of what Common Core is. I started learning about the Common Core several months ago when I found out it was going to be in my school. I talked to my friend Nancy about it, and we started researching like crazy.
Come over here, Michelle.
Hi.
I'm finding a seat that's
We found that nobody really knew what it was. None of the other parents knew what it was. We reached out to other people. We couldn't find anybody who knew what it was. St. Jude, there we go. Yes, Catholic school. I emailed our school to find out if they were going to be adopting the Common Core standards, and yes, they were. So I started connecting with moms online, and we formed a great network, and that's how I met Heidi. Where's Heidi? Hi, Heidi. And so here we are. That brought us where we are today, and I'm really excited about this forum. So I'm going to give the floor to Heidi.
Again, welcome. This is the third forum in less than 24 hours. So these three panelists, along with Heather Crossan, who is the co-founder of Hoosiers Against Common Core, who had to leave us in Columbus to get home to a family obligation, which we all understand. So this is the energy that has been amassed in the last 24 hours. I can't even describe to you. Compared to where we were literally 4 weeks ago, we didn't have a website. By today's end, you guys make up what will be nearing 900 people who heard about this in the last 24 hours. And so don't underestimate the grassroots in Ohio. I would like to introduce you to our panelist, Emmett McGordy, which some of you may look familiar to him because he may look familiar to you because he's been on both of the tech specials on the Common Core and C-Scope. He's with the American Principles Project, and he is the director of the Preserve Innocence Project. Jamie Gass joins from Pioneer Institute. They have been the forerunners of research regarding the constitutionality, the cost involved in Common Core, and they are a private think tank. Unlike all the other reports and so forth that you see, they are not funded by the Gates Foundation. Jamie is the director for Center for School Reform. And rounding out, we have Joy Pullman. Joy is with Heartland Institute. It's not on here, but I want to say that she's a Hillsdale College graduate. She is a research fellow, education, managing editor of School Reform News. And Joy also was kind enough to bring along a lot of free materials on school choice, school reform. So there will be items in the, as you leave, feel free to take anything that you like. There's no cost. She's provided those through our so I won't take up any more of your time. I'll let you, we'll get to the panelists that are going to go through kind of their special area, each for a period of time, and then we'll go to questions, Q&A, because that is actually where it seems like a lot of the information comes out. As simple as this is, it's that complicated as well. So, without further ado, oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you. At the heart of what we're talking about here today, I think it comes down to one great issue that we're dealing with here in America. And that's whether Americans can exercise their God-given right to direct their government and raise their children. It's a fight that's ongoing. I think the American view of those rights has been battered. But I think in fighting this issue, I think we're going to reclaim the idea that government should be directed by the people. And I think it's going to be kind of like the Berlin Wall coming down. You know, when that came down, people started getting a taste of freedom and laying claim to more of it, to their full due amount of freedom. And I think this fight is a fight we can win, and I think we will win it because it directly affects our children and how they will be raised and who decides what information will be collected about them and who that information will be given to. And I think we will also win it because this is a victory that we can win solely in the state houses, solely by people like the 900 people who we've talked to over the last 24 hours, solely by people like them calling their legislator, calling their representative, their senator, and their governor and saying, I understand how Ohio, like a lot of other states, got pushed into this. And a lot of officials really didn't understand what was going on. I understand that. And that's forgivable. But what's not forgivable is if you don't do everything you can to get us out of this. It's non-negotiable. You need to do it. You need to keep fighting for it until we're out of it. And I think by going through this, I think there will be a resurgence of citizen-directed government in America. And I think it will carry over to many other issues. So I think America's greatest days are ahead of us. And it's true that the last panel, the last event we were at was a bit of a debate. And the pro-Common Core side said, well, the Common Core standards program was a bipartisan effort. And that's absolutely true. It would not have been implemented, and it would not have been accepted by the 45 states if Republicans like Jeb Bush and Mitch Daniels and Tony Bennett had not signed on to it and actively and very vigorously propagated it. But it's also true that in rejecting the Common Core, Texas Governor Rick Perry said it would be foolish and irresponsible to put our children's future in the hands of unelected bureaucrats and special interest groups thousands of miles away in Washington, D.C., virtually eliminating parents from their children's upbringing. It's also true that yesterday, the Republican National Committee passed a resolution. The resolution voted on by the 3 state committee members from each of the jurisdictions in the United States. They passed a resolution, and I'll read part of it to you. So the resolution says in part, the Common Core organizations, the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers. It says, whereas the NGA and CCSSO received tens of millions of dollars from private third parties to advocate for and develop the Common Core State Standards strategy, subsequently created the Common Core State Standards through a process that was not subject to any Freedom of Information Acts or other sunshine laws, and it never piloted the Common Core State Standards. There's some more whereas clauses, and then it says, resolve, the Republican National Committee recognizes the Common Core State Standards for what it is, an inappropriate overreach to standardize and control the education of our children so they will conform to a preconceived normal. And be it further resolved that the Republican National Committee rejects the collection of personal student data for any non-educational purpose without the prior written consent of an adult student or a child student's parent, and that it rejects the sharing of such personal data without the prior written consent of an adult student or a child student's parent with any person or entity other than the schools or education agencies within the state, and be it finally resolved that the 2012 Republican Party platform specifically states the need to repeal the numerous federal regulations which interfere with state and local control of public schools, and therefore the Republican National Committee rejects the Common Core State Standards Plan, which creates and fits the country with a nationwide straitjacket on academic freedom and achievement. So this is a bit of background on the Common Core, and again, the standards are kind of instructions to teachers as to what students should learn. And then in the Common Core program, there's assessments or standardized tests, which are aligned to those standards, and then there are high stakes, meaning that teachers in schools and principals are evaluated according to how the students do on those high stakes tests. So the assessments act as kind of an enforcement mechanism to teach the standards. And one of the major people behind the Common Core program, Bill Gates, explained it this way to the National Conference of State Legislators. He said, when the tests are aligned with the common standards, the curriculum will line up as well. So make no mistake about it, the intent here is to very profoundly affect what your children learn. So I'd just like to go through an overview of how this program came down upon us. The idea of having a national education system, national standards, have been around for a while. It was last beaten down and defeated about 20 years ago when Lynn Cheney raised the red flag about national history standards and how those weren't faithful to our founding. The idea was kept alive by progressives, elitists, most notably by the Hunt Institute, founded by former Governor Jim Hunt in North Carolina. Then around 2006-2007, the Hunt Institute recruited the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to the effort. And the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation started spending massive amounts of money dedicated to this project. Joy Pullman here estimates that they spent to date about $163 million. Very little of that is actually on the development of standards. Most of it is on advocacy, public relations, things like that to propagate it among the states. So the Gates Foundation went to work and developed a strategy, kind of laying the groundwork for this national standards program. And that effort culminated in December 2008 when it issued a report called Benchmarking for Success. And Benchmarking for Success describes the Gates view, the National Government Association view, that there should be national standards, there should be assessments aligned to the standards, there should be data collection, and then there should be, the government should incentivize these by a grant program, and then later on there should be a waiver program whereby the federal government issues No Child Left Behind performance waivers to the state in return for further loyalty to the federal program. So now, at this point, I have a couple of quick notes. The National Governors Association and Council of Chief State School Officers have official sounding names, but they are private trade organizations. They're incorporated entities. They don't have granted legislative authority from any state. They take some state dues from some states that are, I would say, reckless enough to pay them state dues. That amount of money kind of pales in comparison to the amount of money they take from third parties like the Gates Foundation. Furthermore, at this point, the National Governors Association hadn't even voted on this plan. The money came in and was utilized by his paid staff in Washington, D.C. Governors hadn't met and decided. Not that that would have any kind of legal impact if they had met and decided, but certainly this is not something that can be reasonably called state-led. So then, remember back in December 2008, the country was in a bit of a fiscal crisis, and the government was saying everything's falling apart, the states face fiscal and economic calamity, and the way out of this, the way to save the country, to save the states, is to have this $1 trillion stimulus bill. And the states had better get as much of that money as possible, or they're going to disintegrate, basically. With respect to education, the Department of Education was saying, well, the states will have to probably lay off hundreds of thousands of teachers unless they take this stimulus money. So right after President Obama was inaugurated, the stimulus bill was passed. And the administration had gotten, for the Department of Education, a $4.35 billion discretionary grant, meaning that the department had a lot of leeway on what to do with that money. The next week, Arnie Duncan, the Secretary of Education, was asked, well, what are you going to do with that money? And he said, well, I really like the work of NGA and Gates in working to bring about national standards. And he said he wanted to be the catalyst who makes that happen. Then Arnie Duncan hired from the Gates Foundation 2 executives, one as a person that was director of his Office of Innovation and Improvement, and the other person he hired as his chief of staff. So he's pretty much signaling, not signaling, he's explicitly saying he likes what the NGA and Gates are doing in this regard. So then they launched the Race to the Top program. The Race to the Top program reflected very much the outline set forth in the Benchmarking for Success program. And the Race to the Top program was marketed as a competitive grant program, but in a way it was anything but that. It really wasn't a true competition per se, not the way it sounded anyway. It was a competition to see which states would readily give up their autonomy and sovereignty, and most of the states fell for it. So the competition said, we'll reward money. There were levels of money that the states could get depending on their size. But to qualify for that money, you have to sign on to our policy program, standards assessments, data collection, and a couple of other things. So you have to sign on to our program. But it wasn't the normal way of the federal government coming and saying, sign on to our program and make policy changes, which I think is insidious enough and is not faithful to the Constitution, is certainly disrespectful of the ultimate earthly sovereigns, the American people. It went two steps beyond that. So the states in the competition had to commit to the standards and assessments and demonstrate to this is how they got scored, demonstrate to the federal government that they would adopt these standards and assessments regardless of whether they won a grant. Furthermore, the assessments and standards had not been developed. So it fits under that constitutional principle, which we're all familiar with. You have to pass the law and implement the policy before you find out what's in it. And I'll briefly go through the timeline. So the first round there were two rounds of applications initially. The first round of applications, and in these applications, the states committed to the assessments and the standards. The first round was due January 19th, 2010. The first draft of the standards was released in March 2010. The second round of applications was due June 1st, 2010. The final draft of the standards was released on June 2nd, 2010. And then the states had 60 days in which to formalize, if they hadn't already done so, in which to formalize their commitment by actually adopting the standards. So in that 60-day period, states would have to, just reasonably thinking through it, you have to get the Common Core, compare them to your old standards, look at the evidence on which the Common Core was allegedly based, evaluate that evidence, perhaps do a pilot program, a limited pilot program of sorts on the quality of the Common Core. And this is a program that was built and still is built as transforming the education of every child in America. And in that respect, I might add, I think they're absolutely correct. But given that, one would think also the state boards of education should probably give notice to the legislators, the elected representatives of the people, particularly the education committees. We've traveled across America meeting with education committee after education committee and the members on those committees. And until Glenn Beck and Michelle Malcolm started speaking out on this issue, I don't think we met one legislator who had known about this program, even though they sat on the education committees. So then, what else would one probably want to do? I mean, like a constitutionalist, what would you want to do probably before adopting this program? I think you'd probably want to discuss it with the people and give the legislators a chance to go and discuss it with their constituents. So obviously there wasn't time to do this in that 2-week period, or 2-month period. Most of the legislatures weren't even in session. And I'll just say a couple of other notes before turning it over to my colleagues. So these standards were drafted behind closed doors in Washington, D.C. They were drafted by special interest groups. The standards are owned and copyrighted by the National Governors Association.